Hello all, welcome back. In this one, we're gonna actually fix the practice exercise because there have been some changes on the website. So let me just bring up the terminal and let's try to run the code, and it's gonna fail. So then we will analyze why it's failing and then we will fix all these issues. So let me just go to the workspace where the project is. So please always make sure that you are at the correct space, and then let's code it. So this is my project folder, and then I'm going to activate the virtual environment because I'm working on the Mac and I have multiple versions of Python. That's why I have to do it. But if you are working on Windows, then guys, just don't worry about it because most likely you have only one Python version. Then I'm going to export the Python path, and there are instructions to set it on Windows also, so you guys can go ahead and do it. And then I'm going to run the code. So I'm going to run py.test. So this is the command for running the register course test, and it's going to run on Firefox for now. So let's just go ahead and quickly run it. And then we will analyze why it's failing, what's happening. So it's going to first log into the application. If the internet becomes a friend to me, I don't know why it's so slow today. Okay, so it's now logging in. And then it should type the course JavaScript and then boom, fail. So there it's gonna fail. You know what happened is previously when we were typing the JavaScript, it was showing the course here, but now it's not showing. So what's the fix? We have to actually click this button. And if we click this button, it shows the course. Then we can actually find it. So the solution is to find the element for clicking the button and then click the course. So that's the solution. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna open the code here. I'm gonna add the code here for finding the button. So I'm gonna say search course icon, and the search course icon is, I actually already found it. Search course and button, and you guys can actually look for it and find this element. This is pretty easy, right? We don't want to waste time on trying to see how we find elements because we already know pretty much. Now we're working on the framework, right? Now what I'm going to do here is self.element click, and then locator is self.search course icon. So that's pretty much it, right? If I, in the enter course name method, after entering the course name, I'm going to click the search icon, then it's going to find the element. So let me just go ahead and quickly run it. And you know what? This time maybe we can run it with Chrome. And let's see what happens. Okay, it's running in the background, and there you go. It clicked JavaScript course and it clicked the enroll button here also, and now it's going to fail here. This is the second failure. This is the second change that happened. So I can show you that its terminal is failing. There are a bunch of exceptions, and it's pretty much failing. And if you actually go through these exceptions, you will see it's not able to find the elements for these guys. So pretty much these guys have changed, and that's why it's failing. So let me, and you can see that it's trying to type in the CVV code, create card information, and nothing is successful. So what happened here? Let me just debug it. I'm going to right click and inspect the element. And then we're going to see, okay, it didn't inspect, and yeah, there you go. So the input is, it has a autocorrect off. It has a name card number, but it doesn't have an ID. I think that's what we were using before. The credit card number had an ID called CC-number. The expiration date had an ID called EXP-date, and the CVV field also had an ID called CVC. But now nothing exists. If you see, this is the credit card number and it doesn't have an ID, right? So that thing changed, and it's not just an ID change, because when I was inspecting it, I noticed that there's one more thing that is updated. So I'm going to dock it at the bottom and bring it up. So we have more view, and this is the element, the input element, as we can see. it has a name called card number. But if we scroll up, here we're gonna see there is an iframe, right? So if I inspect this element and go to console, I can see that this is showing me iframe. So this is not the top window, and the iframe that's shown is this guy, the 4. I think it was showing the 4. Yes, private strip frame 4. So there's an iframe. Now what we can do to handle it? In our code, we actually first have to switch to the iframe, and then we have to find the element and perform the action, and then we have to switch back to the default content, because all of these elements are under an iframe now. Now this guy, it has again, I think it has a name, and it's also under an iframe, and this iframe has a different name. This has a frame 5, right? We can go here and verify this is frame 5. So every element is under a different iframe. So we have to repeat the same step for pretty much everything. Now to actually repeat those things, what I've done is I have created a small utility method or a wrapper inside our Selenium driver class, and I called it switch to frame. So basically this guy is gonna help us to switch to frame. What I'm doing is, if ID is given or name is given or index is given, one of the thing is definitely we need to give, then it just switches to the frame, and there's another method called switch to default content. This is something that we need to switch back to the default content. And then I created few other methods which are gonna be utilized. There's one called get element attribute value. This is gonna be useful to get the attribute value of an element. So because these things are updated, even if we type something here, but the credit card number is not a valid number, then this button is not gonna be enabled. So how do we find if it's enabled or not? I'm gonna inspect it, and let me inspect it again. I think I have to dig down to this guy. Yes, there is this. And if I open it, expand it, there's the button. So if you see this guy, the div has a attribute class, and in this it has a value called is disabled. So it doesn't have another completely separate attribute to find out if the button is enabled or not. So Selenium WebDriver's default is enabled function is not going to work here. That function only works when there's a attribute called disabled or something, or enabled. But since there's no separate attribute, only the class attribute has a value called is disabled, and this shows up when the button is disabled. So we have to find if the class has a value called is disabled, and if it exists, then we assume that the button is disabled. If this value is disabled doesn't exist in the class attribute, then the button is enabled. For that reason, I created the method get element attribute value. So what it's gonna do is it's gonna take the element, and then it's gonna take the attribute, and then it's gonna return the value. Then we implemented a method called is enabled. So by default, what it's gonna do here is it's gonna find the element, it's gonna get the attribute value from the above method, and once it gets the attribute value, if the attribute disabled exists there, then it's going to check for the Selenium WebDriver's API is enabled. But if it doesn't exist, imagine if there is no attribute called disabled. Basically, we are looking for the attribute named disabled, which in our case doesn't exist there. Then what we're going to do here is we're going to look for the attribute called class. And now we're going to get the value of the class attribute, right? And if the disabled word does not exist in the value of class attribute, then we assume that it's enabled. And that's what we are doing, right? So if this disabled word doesn't exist in the class attribute, then this button should be enabled. That's what we're gonna check. Now, if it is enabled, then we're gonna print the log statement. Otherwise, also we're gonna print the log statements, and then it's pretty much done. So these are quite a few utility methods that we created, and it's gonna be really helpful for finding the solution for this. I'm going to stop right now, and in the next lecture, I'm going to actually show you the solution for this second issue that we are facing. In the meantime, if you guys want, you can actually try it out. You can utilize these methods, but don't worry about it. I'm going to show it to you in the next lecture also. So thanks a lot for ending this one.